Hey guys, Clay Westfall here, aka Finesse God, and I want to talk to you today about finesse fishing with respect to wacky worms. And so, this is a pretty important technique for clear water, and I feel like it can really, if you know what you're doing, you can maximize your percentage chance of success out there. So, I'm going to show you kind of a couple of the subtleties and explain to you the situations in which you'd fish the wacky worm, how you'd fish it, whatnot, and what makes it exceptional. So to start out, let's talk about what areas I'd fish a wacky worm. So one of the prime situations or areas in which you'd fish it would be like standing timber. So if you are out on the lake and you see a whole bunch of trees kind of partially crowding out of the water, you could flip in those trees with a wacky worm setup. It doesn't matter if you're fishing over 30 foot of water, as long as you know the strike zone or the area, the section of the water column that the bass are using, you can, just fish that first, let's say 5, 10, 15 feet and reel in and then, cast back out there again. And so it's very important to know, whether it's from fishing reports or word of mouth, like what level in the water, what depth people are catching the fish at. So if they say 15 feet, that could mean 0 to 15 feet over 30 foot of water, or that can mean 0 to 15 feet and 15 is the bottom. They're not going to discriminate. The fish aren't going to discriminate. They're going to use the same column of water regardless of where it intersects a land formation. So that's important to note. So in the situation with the trees, I'll flip in there with the wacky worm. And how I do my wacky worm, there's a couple different ways. The first way that I don't have a jig head for today, but would be to take a weighted wacky style hook. And so it's basically like a drop shot hook similar to this, but you have weight where the eye is, and then of course you'd still have your line tie and everything. So it's integral. The weight is integral to the hook. So one of the good ones that you can find is like a flick shake or something like that. And I'll use generally a pretty lightweight, like 16th, maybe an eighth, but generally about a 16th weight. I feel like that falls really good, especially on like spinning line. I use a lot of light style tackle. So maybe something like 6 8 pound test, 16th or 32nd weight. So in that situation, I may just take like something like a Senko. This here is a really natural color. This is more trying to represent like a bluegill perch type look. And so I'll just, I could just go through the middle of the bait with a hook, something like that, but it'll be weighted. And so when I pitch it out there, it'll fall in the water, and then on the way up, if you're pulling it on the way up, it'll kind of make that action where the each side where it tapers off kind of darts up in the water while you're moving it. So that's a great way to do it. Like I said, the one that I use is called a flick shake, and you can fish that on the bottom even, or close to the bottom. But generally, I would pitch it out in that situation, let it fall through the trees, um, you know, jig it, let it dart up, but I would focus the whole time in keeping my bait in the area that I know based on the information I've been presented where the fish are at. So that's a good one. Probably 70% of the time when I don't have the flick shake, I'll go to like just my normal hook that I showed you guys, something like this. This is a small little, I think it's like a number one, something like that. But I will take my Senko, and this is a different color now. This is like more of a shad, a really natural shad color. And notice that I use extremely natural colors. Um, the brighter the sun gets, the later in the day, the more the fish can see, the better vision that they have, and especially in crystal clear water, I try to use almost translucent type baits so they can't get a super good look at it. If it's very opaque, it gives them a better visual, and they can tell that it's not the real deal. So, with that being said, with my smoke colored kind of shad Senko here, I put this little rubber band. It's just a circular rubber band that I'll kind of I'll wet the rubber band and I'll slide it over the middle of this to where it's in the midsection. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a little nail weight. You could actually use like a finish nail, but this is a 16th ounce nail weight that I bought from like Academy, and I'll go through the end of the Senko with it. So there's two ends to the Senko. There's one that's over here that's really tapered, and then there's one that's a little bit more flat on the end. So I'll take that point of that nail weight and I'll just go right through the end like that. Boom. And I try to make sure I put it in there evenly so it doesn't distort the tip of the Senko. So that's one thing I do. And then I'll take and I remember where I put the weight in. So I know that when this falls, the whole purpose of me putting the weight in there is when it falls, because of the shape of this Senko, it's going to do like a spiral glide on the way down. And it's gonna, a lot of times it's gonna be kind of a wide, long, and lazy spiral. And so it's gonna fall with the weight side first. And so if you think about that, what you want to do is you want to envision the fish coming up from below, which is how it's generally going to eat it. I mean, it's not generally going to chase it down and grab it. I would think it's either going to come face on or from below. And so what I do is I try to put my hook in such a way that the hook point is up with respect to the direction that the bait is falling. So see how that hook point is up? That's extremely, extremely important, because when the fish comes up like this, it grabs it and it gets around the hook point, and you can hook it in the roof of the mouth, which is where you want to be. So that's the first extremely important tip about this. And so, like I said, it's going to spiral on the way down. You can even jig it up just like you would with the flick shape type presentation. But I would say that that's extremely important. Let's see here. So let's talk about another area in which you'd fish something like this with the wacky style. So I talked about the standing timber situation, fishing, the fish are going to congregate more in the crown of the tree. The other situation which you'd use it is like dock fishing. And so in a scenario like that, I'm going to do like a sidearm skip type cast. I'm going to kind of wind up and do a sidearm skip cast underneath the docks back in there as far as I can get. And so when I'm back in there, I want to use at least like 12-pound test, at least. 15's better, 20 would be better. I mean, a rope would be better, to be honest, but I'm going to use as much as I can get away with. The farther you skip your bait under the dock, obviously the less light, so they're going to get less of a look at your line, which is really important. But for something like that, like I said, the line size really matters. I talked about 6 to 8 pound test being an option for for when you're just flipping an open timber. It depends also on, if there's cross members to the tree, or if it's just pole timber that's old standing timber. A lot of the newer stuff still has all the outshoots on it. So that's really important. Like I said, 12 to 15 pound test. But I think, you can also use like a finesse worm. You don't have to use a Senko. The Senko is something that I like because of the profile, and it will get a pretty good big bite. But, when their metabolism, when they're not, so in the summertime especially, which is what we're entering into right now here in Texas, especially in the heat of the day, they're not going to bite as hard as they would, in the morning or night hours. And so if I see that they're not hitting this big profile of Senko, what I'm going to go to is something more like a Zoom trick worm or a Zoom like finesse worm even. The Zoom finesse is like a little 6-inch, small little low profile worm. And so I'll use maybe I'll use the same nail weight I have here, or I may just cut a little bit of a section off of it. If you remember looking at it, it's segmented, so you can control the amount of weight that you want. So like I'll experiment by taking off a section at a time, and I'll see the fall rate. So I'll hold my rod over the side of the boat, and I'll drop the line down, and I'll see how the action is. And I want it to be fast enough. This is key. I want it to be fast enough in clear water to where they can't get a good look at it, but slow enough to where they can get a hold of it. So I don't want it to just torpedo down. There's some instances when you might want to do that if the fish were highly active, but and aggressive. But most of the time, I want to give them a chance to get the bait. I want it to be in the strike zone and entice them. So on the fall, it needs to kind of have that speed that whizzes past them, but they can still see it. So I always kind of manipulate my weight size, test it by holding the rod over the side of the boat, see on slack line how it falls, and I want it to be a fall like pretty good fall. I don't know if this is really a good representation, but probably about this speed or something. Not super fast, like I said, but enough to where it's not just sitting in front of them and they get a good chance to take a close look and inspect the bait. That's what you don't want. And like I said, that goes back to using a really super translucent bait. You could almost use even a clear profile bait, believe it or not. Anything that's going to mask the way that they see it. I think, to kind of wrap this video up, what are the things that you can do to be different for everybody else who's throwing a wacky style fishing rig? I would say the first one is the line size. Sometimes in clear water, I'll use like 4 pound test. I use as little as line as possible because not only do they see fishing line, but they feel fishing line. And so a lot of times I've seen fish, especially in like bedding situations, where you pull up on a nest and you pitch in there and they will swim next to the line and kind of move their bodies around it, and they'll feel the imprint of the line in the water. And so, the diameter of the line is what controls that. And there's obviously a distance that is related to the spread of their sensory on their side, because it's a whole bunch of pores that detect pressure in the water, pressure differences. So that how good they are at discriminating, a certain object in the water is going to be determined probably by the spacing of those receptors and those pores. So I try to use as small as a diameter as possible so they can't get a good bearing on the line. So that, I would say the other one is the hook size. With the wacky style worm, this is a pretty small one, and especially if it's moving at a pretty good rate, they're not going to get. It's going to be more that they see the profile of the bait generally, and they're not keyed in on the hook. But the smart ones have the biggest eyes, and they're the biggest ones, and they've made it to that point in life, and they have great vision. So if it's too slow and they get a good look at it, they're going to see that hook. They're going to know it's not right, and they're going to get to discriminate that bait. So I'd say the hook size is extremely important. You don't want to go too small, especially if you're ever burying a hook inside of plastic. But it wants to be such that you have a little bit of an area for to hook the fish, not too much. So you could go smaller than this if you wanted, but like I said, keep in mind there's a point of diminishing returns there. So the line size, the hook, always in clear water. If you're in a situation where you're flipping to timber or you're skipping under a dock or whatever, stay as far back as possible from where you're fishing. A lot of people feel more comfortable getting right on top of their fishing area so they can make an accurate cast. You just got to work on accuracy at a distance. And if that involves putting out a cup, out in the garage and flipping to it, whatever you have to do, the closer you are to those fish, they know they are aware of presence and they know it's not normal. And so the big ones are going to kind of, move off the cover that you're fishing. The other one is your electronics, like your fish finder, your trolling motor, whatever it is. They hear that. I'm always turning my trolling motor down to like 20%, or I very rarely press it. I'll just let the wind drift me. In the situations to where I have to use my trolling motor, I would rather have a constant low RPM speed on it, to where it's a very low kind of humming sound rather than an intermittent start, stop, start, stop. That is extremely important. But with respect to the wacky worm, that's the main things. Like I said, just in summary, the flick shake style of hook, where you have the integral weight, where it's towards the eyelid of the hook. That's a great one. It's like a ball-shaped head on there, just like a traditional jig head, but with a small profile hook. So the flick shake, in that case, you wouldn't need the nail weight. And then if you want to use the nail weight, because you want to have more of a gliding action, that's when you would use this. Remember, the flick shake, when you jig the flick shake, it's going to be more an even an even movement with respect to both sides being split in half, and that travel vertically. That's that pulsating action. But like I said, if you want the glide, you're going to go with that nail weight because it's going to fall in such a way where it's the nail weight first, and it's just going to spiral on the way down. So it just depends on, you know, trying different things. A lot of times I prefer the nail weight in situations where I want to get way back under a dock, because I feel like when I pitch it in there, the nail weight kind of glides back and it gives you a little bit more distance underneath the platform of the dock. Whereas if you would just pitch out that flick shake and the traditional way of doing, quote unquote, traditional of a wacky worm, it would just kind of fall straight down with respect to the dock, the edge of the dock or the platform. And remember, another great thing to think about, just to close this out, is you want to always maintain semi-slack line. So you don't want to throw your bait out there and let it fall on like a taut line, because what will happen is it's going to create an arc and it's going to pull your bait away from where you intend it to land. Always want to be semi-slack, but you don't want to be so slack to where you can't detect the very subtle bites, because there's been plenty of times when I've been sight fishing and I've flipped my bait out there and I've had, I haven't had it semi-slack to where it's just completely limp and I can't feel the bite, but I could see them bite it. And so I've learned through sight fishing that a lot of times you'll get bites that are completely undetected. And so that's why you want to have your hands on the rod, be focused, have that semi-slack so that you can feel that telegraphed bite, and that should help you tremendously. So hope this was very valuable. This is part of my new series on, specifically focused on finesse fishing. That's kind of my trademark way of fishing. I grew up on the West Coast, and I've always kind of gravitated towards that in particular situations where I was having a hard time getting bit. So, like I said, hope this helps out. Please visit my webpage, bushwhackerbaitco.com. I have over 10 years professional experience as a fishing guide. I coach high school fishing, and my goal is to just bring as much quality fishing knowledge to the market as possible. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.